I just start, no? So today's speaker is Tobias Galler from IFISC. Now, no, so this is a talk that I sort of wrote over the last week or so. And I want to talk about writing and writing well and why it's important to try to write well when you're a scientist. So more or less, there are 4 parts to this talk. So the first one is to try to convince you why you have to try to write well. Because my observation is that, or my impression is that not everybody tries maybe as hard as they could. Part 2 is some techniques and issues and tips that I have sort of picked up in the last months or so from a few books that I've looked at. And then part 3, there's some paragraphs that I took from various documents and that I will try to edit here, sort of show you how I would edit this or how one could edit this. And then there's some closing remarks. I don't know how much time I have for part 3. So we may have to do this, depending on how things go, we may have to do a second session sometime in the future. But this is not what this is not meant to be. It's sort of a session where I tell people off, like how not to write or something, right? And I don't have the wisdom eaten with a spoon either, right? So I think the message is more that we can all always try to be better writers. And so the books I've used are mostly these. So I really recommend this Schimmer, Writing Science. Then there's this paper, this book, Scientists Must Write by Barrs, but that's not only about papers, it's also about other things. And then there's this is a classic book about writing in general, nothing to do with science or science writing, specifically The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. And then there's these 2 books, Stephen King on writing, so the Stephen King. I don't know, I read it, it's nice, right, I think. And then there's this book by Jari Sarameki about writing a paper, but that's sort of more about large-scale structure, how to construct a story for a paper. So I'm not going to talk much about that. So first of all, writing is a kind of high Lyapunov exponent activity. What I mean by this is tiny changes can have big effects. For example, a comma or a hyphen. I give you an example. My favorite 3 things are eating my cats and not using commas. So if you put a comma here, the thing changes significantly, right? So you have to be careful with details, right? Another one, this is a man eating chicken, right? This is Barack Obama eating chicken. This is a man eating chicken. So the hyphen changes things. Careful. A complex systems scientist, that's us. A complex systems scientist is a scientist who works on systems, and the scientist is complex, not the system. A contagious disease modeler is somebody who models contagious diseases. A contagious disease modeler is a disease modeler who is contagious. It's different. So careful, tiny details can make a difference. But these are things you have to think about when you write. So part 1, so why do you have to write and why do you have to try to do it well? So why do you write? You write to communicate. You write to convince somebody of something. You write to think, hopefully. And you write to remember or to plan or many other things. Right? So here in this talk, it's mostly about the first 3. To communicate, to convince somebody, and to think. Who do you communicate with? Or who do you try to convince? Your supervisor, your student, your collaborator, a referee, an editor, a reader of your paper, a member of the admin staff, a member of the public, school children. As just now, you're writing, you have to think about who do you write for when you write a particular piece. So the process of writing is, you are there, you're writing something and you're producing a document, right, of something. And then you send it to somebody. And usually you want something from this other person when you do that, right? So, and that other person then sort of looks at it, right? And they can go like, okay, I'll give you what you wanted, right? Or this, right? Now, and you have control over that, at least partially, right? By the style you're writing. And I think, or my claim is that many writers think about this part of the process, but not very much about this part of the process. So what happens when this document arrives at the person you're sending it to? What will happen then, right? What will go on in their brain? And So that's a part to consider always. So an intelligent writer thinks carefully about the second part of the process. An intelligent writer is an empathic writer who thinks about what would happen when that other person reads the document. So for example, I received this email many years ago when I was still in the UK. This was, dear Tobias, I'm a fourth-year student at the University of Manchester, currently looking for a PhD place. I have taken your course on advanced statistical physics, and I found it very interesting. I have seen that you're offering a PhD in the area of complex systems. If possible, would you be able to give me an idea of specific topics? So far, so good. You get many emails like this, right? But then there was this line. I have kept this email brief, but I would like, if you would like something more detailed from me, I'll be happy to answer questions. So this person wrote, I have kept this email brief, presumably because they thought, well, this guy, Tobias, is getting a lot of emails. He doesn't want to read long emails. So he wrote, I kept this email brief. And for me, this was a trigger. This guy thought about me, how I would read this email. I immediately had like plus, 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 plus. I want to meet this student because this guy is clearly an empathic writer, right? So it made a very good impression. Just that those words and the fact that the email is short, right? So what would you like to happen in the reader's mind? And what do you think with your current draft will happen in the reader's mind, right? The answer may not be the same. So then you have to sort of, so empathy. So am I giving the reader all the information that they need? Will they be able to follow the logic of my writing? Are the sentences clear and unambiguous? Have I said everything I need to say? Have I said more than I need to say? And so on, right? So here on this slide, by the way, I'm saying more than I need to say because this thing and this thing is essentially the same. So I could have removed one of these lines, right? So it is the author's job to make the reader's job easy, I would claim. So, and this is, so Ken Follett is one of my favorite authors. So he has about 200 million books sold, and he says no reader should have to read a sentence twice. So if you can achieve this in your papers, that would be fantastic, right? But that should be the aim. That must be the aim. No reader ever has to read a sentence twice. So, and he also asked this, are there points, in interviews, Ken Follett says, like, he wants to avoid in his books like points where he says, well, now it's, you know, the reader reads it, okay, now is a good point to make a cup of tea or something, right? So you want to keep the reader reading. So ask yourself, are there points at which the reader could be difficult or get bored or where the reader might stop reading, right? You want to keep the reader reading because otherwise this happens. So, okay, you communicate with these people, but who else? Yourself, right? You write for yourself often. For example, I don't know, I write shopping lists like this, right? I guess many people do, I don't know, right? So why do I do this? Well, writing is a tool for remembering, right? Because otherwise I'm in Macedonia and I don't know what to buy. So, but writing is also a tool for clear thinking, right? So there's this traditional view, some people say, so this is a quote from this Chicago Guide of Communicating Science, which I haven't really read in detail. So to write clearly, you must think clearly. This is the first part of the quote. So it's like, first think clearly and then write. But the author, Montgomery, says, this is rubbish. It's not like this. It's not like you think clearly first and then you write. Instead, clear thinking can emerge from clear writing. It is through the process of writing that your thinking becomes clear. So I would argue that it's a sort of, you know, you can't do one without the other, or at least I can't. In order to get something clear in my head, I have to write it down. And I think, so in that sense, writing is a tool. It's like you learn how to do integrals, to do, I don't know, a certain piece of science, so you have to learn how to write and how to write well to do a certain piece of science. So writing is a tool for clear thinking. And then Montgomery goes on, good and clear thinking emerges from a process of struggle. So it's not, the idea is not that you sit down and you write well immediately. Basically, very few people do this, right? There's a process of struggle. And so what does that look like in practice? It looks like this, right? So I don't know for the master students, or like when we write scientific papers, you don't submit the first or second draft, right? You submit the 12th, 22nd, 15th, whatever draft, right? And then each draft is like, from there to there is like, I don't know, order of a few days of work of rewriting it, right? So the idea that you write a first draft and then somebody makes a few edits and you submit it, it is not like this, right? And the higher the journal, or the more difficult it is to get into the journal, the more you have to polish this and think about individual words and sentences, right? So good writing emerges from a struggle. And so then it looks like, I don't know, for people who have written papers, they know this, but if you haven't written papers, you write something as a student and then you get it back from your supervisor and it looks like this. And then there's a discussion going on, basically inside the paper. Should we change this paragraph? Should we change this sentence? Is this really the best way of saying this? And then you go through, I think my record is when we submitted draft 72. And this is, Barras claims that one big difficulty is that most educated people are sort of happy with their writing and they don't actively try to improve their writing. And this is sort of, there's a temptation, right? That you say, well, I have a PhD, surely I'll be able to write, right? Or something, but this is not true necessarily. So everybody can constantly improve their writing, I think. So the message is up to here. So this is sort of I think I don't want to quote people now, but I have evidence from talking to students or people that for some, it is not somehow easy to agree that good writing is important. Let's put it this way. So, so I think the first step is to recognize the importance of good writing. Then you want us to try to write well. And then you have to put yourself in the mind of the reader, so the empathy. And good writing emerges from struggle. So this is up to now then. Messages from me. So now, a few techniques, tips that I've sort of picked up from these books. So what follows is mostly about rewriting, not about writing itself. So you write a draft and then you rewrite it. So everything that follows is about the rewriting process, not about the initial draft, or most of what follows. So, and because, so these are two quotes now that say the same thing. So Hemingway said apparently the first draft of anything is crap. Right? So and this is true. Or there's a second way of saying the same thing by an American novelist, that every first draft is perfect because all the first draft has to do is exist. So basically, the first step is to write a first draft, and that can be bad in a way, right? It will be bad. In fact, so some people say, I think Stephen King says this, the first draft is for you and for you only, for the writer. But don't show your first draft to anybody. So it's for you. It can be as bad as you want. It's just, the purpose is just to exist. But don't show your first draft to somebody else. Show your third or fourth draft to somebody else. So this is what. So there's this joke. If you're walking around in New York, right, and you say, well, I don't know how to get to Carnegie Hall. Which way where have to go? What streets do I have to go, right? So you ask somebody, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? The answer is practice, 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 right? It's a concert hall, right? How do you get a paper published? Polish, polish, polish. So revise, revise, revise. So, okay. So now I'm turning to Schimmer. I like Schimmer's book on writing science. And he talks about arcs. And he says, well, the whole paper has a kind of story arc. Then each section has a story arc. Each paragraph has a story arc. And each sentence has a story arc. So some message, or you want each paragraph, each sentence has to move the reader from some place to some other place. And you have to sort of think what that should be. And so this Jari's book that I mentioned at the beginning is more about sort of paper, how to construct the paper as a whole. Here I want to sort of basically look at paragraphs, sentences, and words mostly. So paragraphs. So sometimes you get something like this, right? You see something like this, right? In books or in papers or something. So you cannot read the text, right? Because it's sort of blurred out. But you seeing this, you know immediately this is going to be unreadable, right? You don't have to see the letters here. Even if you saw the letters, it would be unreadable. No? I mean, I hope you agree, right? Because this is so dense and there's so little white space and it's just cognitively incredibly difficult to absorb. So first of all, so this is called a text wall. So what's the problem here? So somehow this is an overload and the eye needs white space and somehow it's just complicated, right? To absorb something like this. But I would sort of claim something else. I think, personally, when you read a scientific paper, or at least when most readers read a scientific paper, you don't read it word by word. When you read a novel, you read it from the beginning to end, right? You read it word by word. But when you read a scientific paper, I don't read scientific papers like this. So I don't know. So instead, you look at it and you say, aha, okay, they do this, this, this. These are the section headings. These are the key figures. So you try to get an idea of what they do broadly. Yeah, they use this method to do this, and the main finding is that. And then you start reading parts of the paper. I don't know. This is how I read papers. I think this is how most people read papers. So scientific papers are not read word by word. So in a novel, of course, a novel looks like this, right? In a book, many books. But a scientific paper should not look like this. So readers skim read first, try to understand what this is about. And they want to know what the structure of the paper quickly, and the main ideas and the topics. And then they will read details later in a scientific paper. So I would call this top-down reading. You first sort of try to assess what's the structure, and then you look into different parts of it. But this kind of block text wall sort of doesn't allow you this. So what you have to do here, the only thing you can do with this is read it word by word, and then try to afterwards infer what the structure was, right? And that is harder somehow. So instead, if you have clear structure headings, that allows the reader to sort of read top down, right? You get the structure first, and you recognize what this is about, and then you go into detail. So I wouldn't, so frequently I find myself when I edit some draft by somebody, or the first thing I do is introduce section headings to understand what this is about, right? And then sort of one edits within these sections. So Strunk and White, they say, make the paragraph the unit of composition. And then, so here's a trick that I learned about 5 years ago from this guy, George Constable, who used to be actually a student, a PhD student in Manchester with us. And then 10 years after that, or something, or 8 years after that, I happened to write a paper with him when he was already had his own permanent job. And we wrote a paper together, and then I wrote something, or the student, and then George rewrote it, and he did this. For each paragraph in his LaTeX file, he had like this thing, paragraph theme. What is the theme of this paragraph? This is an incredibly useful technique, just to have a comment at the beginning of each paragraph. What is this paragraph about? So this is so simple. I was so embarrassed that I hadn't realized it myself, right? This is so simple. And it was sort of, I don't know, 15 years after my PhD, I come to this conclusion that maybe a paragraph should have a topic, right? This is not rocket science, but so do it, right? It's very easy, and it helps you a lot. It's incredible. And for example, so I'll give you an example. This is a paragraph that I wrote yesterday. Okay? So I wrote this. Statistical physics deals with systems of many particles. It can also be used in the social sciences and in finance. The first ideas of statistical physics came in the late 1800s. Nowadays, people focus a lot on small systems with noise, for example, quantum dots or molecules. This is called stochastic thermodynamics. Earlier thermodynamics was deterministic and dealt with laws between macroscopic things such as pressure, volume, and temperature. Statistical mechanics looks more into microstates and the maximization of the number of microstates. The log of that number is called entropy. So every single sentence is correct, but there's no arc here, right? This is just a random collection of thoughts, right? There's no message. You're not going from A to B. What is the topic of this paragraph, right? Other than random things about statistical physics. So this is not very good writing, right? I mean, I try to construct it that way, right? So Schimmel has examples like this. So this doesn't have a good arc. So this is the stream of consciousness. The author writes each sentence as it comes to your mind somehow, and there's no plan, no sense of direction, nothing, right? But here's now the important thing. Even experienced writers, I don't know, somebody who's written many papers, right? The first draft often looks like this. Because you're tired in the evening, or whatever, in the morning, you're writing something and say, well, I have to write something. Let's write just something what comes to my mind. And then you get this paragraph. The difference is I would not send such a paragraph to somebody else, or right? But you then have to edit it. But everybody starts with something like this, and then you edit it. So experienced writers write like this too in a first draft. But the difference is they then edit, and this kind of thing doesn't survive until kind of draft, when they send it to somebody else. So Schimmel distinguishes between point last paragraphs and point first paragraphs. So here's a point last paragraph that I took from an undisclosed. Okay, right? So in the flamenco jargon, genres or styles are called palos. Genre classification of flamenco music is often subject to personal interpretation and previous experience of the listener. In flamenco gatherings, leading even to academic discussions about the proper classification of some palos. Here, following a quantitative approach, we investigate the flamenco genre classification. Importantly, we find that flamenco styles are characterized by unique lexical features as shown in their lyrics. So there's a clear point to this paragraph. And the point is at the end. Right? So you know exactly what this paragraph is about and what the point of this paragraph. So this, right? So this is point last paragraph. There are also point first paragraphs, where the point comes first. And here's an example that somebody, so this is a paper by Novoselov and Geim, where they found graphene, 2004. This is a Nobel Prize paper, right? 2004. And if you look at it, so this is in Science, you look at it, the first sentence here, the ability to control electronic properties of a material by externally applied voltage is at the heart of modern electronics. Next paragraph. We report the observation of the electric field effect in a naturally occurring two-dimensional material referred to as fuel layer graphene. So I went through this paper and looked at the first sentence of each paragraph. Right? And then it goes on. The next. We have been able to prepare graphitic sheets of thickness down to a few atomic layers, to fabricate devices from them and to study their electronic properties. Our graphene films were prepared by mechanical exfoliation, repeated peeling of small mesas of highly oriented pyrolytic graphite, whatever. So, but if you take all the first sentences and put them together, you get the story. You have the full story of the paper by just taking the first sentence of each paragraph and putting them together. Right? So the ability to control electronic properties, we report the observation of this electric field effect in two-dimensional material. We have been able to prepare sheets of thickness down to a few molecules, atomic layers. Our graphene films were prepared by this method in few layer graphene, the typical dependence of its sheets, the resistivity, this is the property of the thing. Our measurements can be explained by this model, and so, and in the end, graphene may be the best possible metal for metallic transistor applications. So you take the first sentence of each paragraph, and you have the full story of the paper. It's amazing, right? And I'm told, I have not read all the papers by Geim, but I am told that Geim always writes like that. Right? So this is another method of doing it. Okay, sentences. Okay, so I'll give you this example. So viruses were not, this is from Schimmel. Viruses were not studied in the sea until 1989. Yet they are the most abundant biological entities. So this is a sort of distinction that people make. The beginning of the sentence sets the topic. This is viruses. And the end of the sentence is usually the thing that you remember most. That's the stress. The thing that is stressed. So here, this sentence basically says, well, there's something, viruses are an old topic, and here we learn something new about them. Right? Viruses have been studied since 1989, or whatever, is something about yet the important thing is they are the most abundant biological entities. Right? So this is this. Now Schimmel rearranged this. So now the second sentence. The most abundant biological entities in the sea are viruses, yet they were not studied until 1989. It's the same elements, but viruses is now in the middle. So viruses is not particularly important. The important thing is here, so it was only in 1989 that the most abundant thing was studied. And the fact that it's a virus is sort of secondary, right? It's like, we haven't even started looking at the most abundant species until 1989. And the third sentence, the most abundant biological entities in the sea were not studied until 1989. Viruses. So the focus is viruses. Right? So there's 3 ways of rearranging these, or there's more, 6 ways, in fact. So there's 3 things here, right? 1989, viruses, and the most abundant species in the sea. And you can do 6 permutations of this. And each permutation has a different message. So you have to think carefully when you write something, what is the message that you want to send, right? What do you want to stress and what do you not want to stress? So this is Schimmel says, and I think I agree. So there's this, people call it apparently the 2-3-1 rule. So the stress position is at the end, has the greatest emphasis. That's why the 1 is at the end. The 1 is the most important thing. The topic is at the beginning. And the middle carries the least emphasis. they say. So, and I think if you read text, read some text and see if you agree with that. So here's another example. Net mineralization represents the nitrogen available to plants because it reflects the difference between microbial nitrogen release and uptake in soil. This sentence is somewhat challenging, right? Because it starts with net mineralization. And if you don't know what that means, you already have to keep that in your head. Right? It's sort of like, well, what is this? Okay, let me read on and then come back to it. This is already difficult, right? And then this with this because it reflects, this is sort of makes, this is a bit clumsy, right? I would say. Schimmel says. So then you can do it like this. The amount of nitrogen available for plants is controlled by net mineralization, the difference between microbial nitrogen release and uptake in soil. This is already easier to read. It puts this net mineralization in the middle, so you sort of read over it, right? It's not that important what the term is, right? So this is sort of easier, I would say. Then there's this variant. The amount of nitrogen available for plants is controlled by the difference between microbial nitrogen release and uptake in soil. So this is even easier, right? And this sentence assumes that you don't actually have to mention net mineralization. It doesn't even mention this. Right? This is maybe something if you write for the public, you maybe don't even give this term, right? And then he quotes another variant, which is this. The amount of nitrogen available for plants is controlled by the balance between microbial nitrogen uptake and release in soil. We define this balance as net mineralization. So here it defines this term. This is, if you want to explain to somebody what the term is, this is probably the best of those sentences. But you have to be careful if you write this in a paper and all your readers know what net mineralization is, then you look a bit kind of like as you're explaining that to yourself, right? So if you write it like this, this is assuming that the reader will not know what this is. And this one is assuming that the reader doesn't know and doesn't need to know. So you have to ask yourself, can I expect my reader to know what net mineralization is? And if not, do they need to know this? And depending on it, you can choose sentence structure, right? Here's another example. It has been predicted that the global average temperature will increase at a rate of 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. Is that perfectly okay sentence, I would say. But still, is maybe, or is it, well, it's more now, no? Well, I don't know, whatever. This is from this book. The sentence is okay, but still it can be improved. So it's a more complicated than it needs to be, because there are two actors here. It has been predicted. So there's somebody predicting. And then there's average temperature will increase. So you have two actors, two entities doing something. And so you can simplify this. Global average temperature has been predicted to increase at a rate of 0.2 Celsius per decade. This is easier to read, I think. It's not that big. I mean, this is not that big problem, right? But anyway, and here's the passive voice. It's the kind of passive. It has to be careful. Passive voice is not always a good thing to do, but here it works well. Right? Then I invented this sentence. In this study, leveraging highly detailed data from social media and effective tracking methods relying on mobile phone data, we identify the hotspots of social media activity in Palma. So is an okay sentence, right? It's okay, but not great, I would say. So how can this be improved? So what makes this, how can you simplify this? So I would say this sentence in red, leveraging highly qualified, highly detailed, is sort of a bit complicated, right? This is a qualifying sentence, and we don't really know what is being qualified. It interrupts the flow. Because in this study, we identify the hotspots of social media activity in Palma. So it increases the mental load on the reader. And the idea was to make the job of the reader as easy as possible. So one can rewrite it like this. We identify locations in Palma with high social media activity, taking advantage of data from social media and tracking information from mobile phones. Sort of says the same thing, but I think it's easier. I don't know. I mean, it's not that your paper gets rejected if you write this, right? But the whole idea is sort of, we can always try to make things better, a bit better. No? I still don't like the sentence very much because social media is repeated here and here, but I didn't know how to fix it. And I probably, if one thinks a bit more about this sentence, one can maybe make it even better, right? But then you have to think about it. It may take you I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes to think about how to do it, right? But that's what I'm saying. Good writing emerges through struggle. So passive voice. Should you write simulations were conducted or we carried out simulation? I think this is easier to read. I don't like this passive thing. A calculation was done. I don't know. So this, I must say, this was a problem in the UK. All students did it like that with this passive. I don't know. Here I have not, but anyway. Or equation 7 was inserted into equation 5 and the term x was isolated. I mean, I would say we insert equation 7 into 7 into 7, not, but 7 into 5, and then isolate the terms x. So now we give you an extreme example. We went to a birthday party. Fun was had. You wouldn't say that, right? You would not say that, right? So this is extreme, okay? But it's perfect. I mean, it's grammatically it's fine, right? But you okay. So sometimes the passive is justified, though. You have to think. So, for example, you reply to a referee and you say the referee has misunderstood the idea of this. Sounds a bit aggressive. You could say we think there's been a misunderstanding. This is sort of almost like passive voice, sort of, right? But it's as aggressive as this. So you have to then decide: do you want to be aggressive with this referee or do you want to be friendly, right? Or the authors of reference 17 have made a mistake, or a mistake was made in reference 17. So politicians say this all the time, right? A mistake was made because they don't want to say who, they don't want to blame anybody. They sort of, a mistake was made. Lessons will be learned. But you can sort of, I don't know, you can say that or you can say that. We point out the following mistake in reference. It's a bit more friendly. Okay, words. So the first sentence is, we now use the gobbledygook method to analyze equation 3. The second sentence is, we now use the so-called gobbledygook method, reference 17 to 19, to analyze equation 3. So what's the difference between these sentences? What assumption do you make about the reader in for these two sentences? Exactly. So the first sentence assumes that the reader knows what the gobbledygook method is, right? Because you're saying, we use the gobbledygook method. Surely everybody knows this. If you, here in this sentence, you say the so-called, it's like, dear reader, you may not know this, but it's called the gobbledygook method and you can look it up here, right? So you're making an assumption about your reader. And that's what when you write something, that's what I said. Think about the process of the document arriving with a reader. Can you assume that this reader knows the gobbledygook method or not, right? So presumably, if you publish in Physical Review E, you don't say, we now arrive at a thing that is called a differential equation, right? You don't say the so-called differential equation, right? You wouldn't do that, right? Then this is like, okay, this is true. But if you have some method that is, I don't know, the so-called pair approximation, for example, I don't know, right? This is sort of borderline. I mean, if you have some hyper-specialized thing that nobody knows, then you have to sort of, this just helps the reader. If I read this and I don't know the gobbledygook method, I may put the paper away. These guys, this is for specialists. They assume that everybody knows the gobbledygook method, so I have no chance of reading this. So I'm not reading this, right? Whereas here I say, like, I don't have to know this, apparently, so I can keep reading. Omit needless words, Strunk and White. So this is a sentence. So the theory is developed in the context of a simple one-dimensional toy model, but it is applicable more generally. So this is a sentence that I took from a paper. And so this can be simplified, right? The theory is developed in the context of is for a model. And if I say a toy model, I don't have to say simple, right? I would say. This is from a paper that I published in Phys Rev E 2009 with this, the sentence with this stuff, right? So this is my own paper where I say, well, I didn't do a good, I mean, I could have done a better job, right? I mean, it was published anyway, has a reasonable number of citations, but it could have been better. So the theory is developed today, or maybe reading this again, the theory is developed for a one-dimensional toy model, but it is applicable more generally. I think this sentence is better than this. Multi-layer networks are a tool in the realm of complex systems. Multi-layer networks are a tool for complex systems. I don't have to say in the realm of. Why should I say that? For, much simpler. Reduces the cognitive load on the reader. Mallorca has a Mediterranean climate regime and strongly temporal temperature fluctuations. Is okay, right? But you can say this is invented. But why don't we say Mallorca has a Mediterranean climate and temperatures vary strongly over the year? Why do I have to say climate regime? Why do we have to say strongly temporal temperature variations? I find much simpler, no? I would say. In the fully connected regime, the model can be solved analytically. The fully connected regime. On fully connected networks, the model can be solved analytically. Or maybe the fully connected model can be solved analytically. Simpler, no? I would say. So, again, nobody will reject your paper if you write this. But I think there's a, we use a stochastic differential equation approach too. You say we use stochastic differential equations to do this. This is a thing that this is maybe a personal thing. I don't like this, I don't like the word temporal. The temporal evolution of the system, I would just say the time evolution. But this is a borderline, this is maybe me, right? I don't know, I mean, anyway, anything in this talk may be me, yeah? So you can disagree, right, of course. But I'm just, I mean, for any one example, you may disagree with me, right? And say, well, he's being pedantic and this is not actually true or something. But on the whole, I hope you agree that it is worth sort of thinking about each sentence and each word. This is also a thing. From a theoretical point of view, we can analyze the system with master equations. From a theoretical point of view, can we not just say we can study the system analytically with master equations? What's a theoretical point of view? We study the system starting from a master equation. I know it's simpler, no? I mean, I've also done this, right? But I would try to avoid it from, Okay, then Stephen King says the adverb is not your friend. The treatment dramatically increased X by a factor of 42. You can just say the treatment increased X by a factor of 42. Historically, this is from an undisclosed EFISC master thesis. Historically, graph theory is traced back to 1736, when Euler published a paper on the issue of the 7 bridges of Königsberg. The author is saying 1736. Do we really have to also say historically? If you're talking about something like, 300 years ago? So graph theory dates back to 736, when Euler published a paper on the issue of the 7 bridges of Königsberg. This adverb is not needed here. It's not true that you can delete all adverbs, but some or many. So this is a debatable thing. I've debated this with Raoul. The system in equation 3 is highly nonlinear, or the system in equation 3 is nonlinear. I would claim there's no need to say highly nonlinear, because either it's nonlinear or not. But then Raoul said, but what about weakly nonlinear? But weakly nonlinear is different from nonlinear, because weakly nonlinear means that you can do some kind of perturbation theory or something. So I think it is okay sometimes to say the system is weakly nonlinear, if it really is. But to say a system is highly nonlinear, what does the word highly add? Highly nonlinear as opposed to what? So, well, yeah, okay, but yeah, okay. If that's true. Okay, so then, but then you have to make that clear to the reader, right? So, okay, it depends on context, I think, well, so I think weakly nonlinear is, to me, like you can do some kind of perturbation theory that, like, sort of, I don't know, right? If you're using it in that, this is debatable. That's what I'm saying. I'm being a bit pedantic. I'm trying to make a point, right? So, okay, I'm trying to be also controversial a bit, right? I mean, if you, like, I just want to get you thinking, right? I don't want to tell you have to do this. I want you just to sort of, networks are becoming widely used in a variety of fields. I would just say networks are used in a variety of fields. Widely? What does widely, which you're already saying variety of fields, what does widely add? Not sure. As the next step, we simply insert equation 6 into equation 4. Well, simply, we don't have to say that, right? In fact, it may annoy the reader. Anthropomorphic expressions. So this means attributing human traits, feelings, or behaviors to non-human objects, right? This is what it means. So for example, people say the theory argues that X is important. The chapter found that this, or the chapter describes, a chapter cannot describe anything. A chapter cannot find anything, right? Or the curve grows and then slows down. A curve cannot grow. The figure is getting bigger or what? So a curve cannot grow, right? So, but people write like this, right? Sometimes. So one has to be careful. Some of them are okay, but here I would say the theory predicts that X is important, or Trump et al. Found that, or something like that, right? Or in this chapter I describe, right? Rather than the chapter describes. So here I didn't know, there's no easy fix for this one. I didn't have an easy fix, right? Yeah, no, but I guess I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I mean, the first one, I don't know. You could say the theory predicts. Can the theory predict? Well, I guess, but I don't know. I'm not saying this is completely like a no-go. You must never do it. But one can sort of, when one can avoid it, one can avoid it, right? Sometimes, I mean, I've also done it, of course. Maybe what is acceptable, I think, general is the simulation suggests, the theory assumes, the data indicates, things like that. The master equation confirms. I would say an analysis of the master equation confirms. Or this one, so this I've seen this. I'm not sure I've seen it here, but in the UK I've seen this many times. A plus B is C plus D. We now divide equation 1 by X. So this is a pedantic point. That to me means this. I would say we divide both sides of the equation by X. Now this is a pedantic difference, but okay, yeah, but still, I don't like. Yeah, but it takes no effort to do this. It is not more. I mean, so I understand. I understand. This is maybe me being me or something, right? But I don't know. It's also a question of taste, right? I'm not saying this is wrong, but okay. Now, okay, so I have a few examples of things from paper. So this is a paragraph from a paper. So the introduction of continuous versions of spin systems with discrete degrees of freedom. Well, I should read slowly. The introduction of continuous versions of spin systems with discrete degrees of freedom is common in statistical mechanics and has led to a better analytical understanding of many basic features displayed by various spin models. There's something about making discrete spins continuous. The appeal of continuous models lies in the fact that calculations are simplified considerably compared to their counterparts with discrete Ising spins, so that in many cases, a full analytical solution of the models with continuous spins becomes possible. It's okay. I don't like it. It's published like this, right? Tobias Galler, David Sherrington in 2000. So this is published like that. David Sherrington is one of the fathers of spin glass theory, a very big figure. He didn't have any objections to that. It's published like this. But I looked at it again and said, well, one could edit this, right? And you notice that I'm giving examples of my own stuff, and that's on purpose, of course, right? So this is like, it is not obligatory. I mean, you can publish the stuff like that, right? But I'm just trying. What I'm trying to say is one can always improve. And so if I look at this now, the introduction of continuous versions of spin systems with discrete degrees of freedom. Can we not just say continuous versions of discrete spin systems? Easier, no? It's a continuous version of a spin system that is discrete. Continuous versions of discrete spin systems. Note the hyphen. So what is discrete is the spin, not the system. Say discrete. Then the next thing. In statistical mechanics, this paper is published in the Journal of Statistical Mechanics. Probably most readers will know that any paper in that journal is about statistical mechanics, so I can just delete that. All right? Now, of many basic features displayed by various spin models, it's very ambiguous, no? Various features, so sorry, many features of various spin, doesn't say anything really, right? I would claim, or not much, so we can still delete it. Then the next thing lies in the fact that, very complicated construction, is the appeal of continuous models is that calculations are simplified. It lies in the fact. It is just simply is. And calculations are simplified considerably compared to their counterparts with discrete spin systems. So I change it. The appeal of continuous models is that calculations are simpler. And the text is now also simpler. So that in many cases, a full analytical solution of the models with continuous spins becomes possible. And that's sort of implied, right? That we're making this continuous spin model, and then what is analytically possible can be studied must be these models. So I can also delete that. So, and then we have this now. So the introduction of continuous versions of discrete spin systems is common and has led to a better analytical understanding. The appeal of continuous models is that calculations are simpler. In many cases, a full analytical solution becomes possible. It perfectly is understandable, right? Perfectly understandable, it says the same thing, and is about, 40% shorter, I would say, and much easier to read. I don't know, I claim. Here's another example. The okay, I have 3 examples, right? So this is the second. The quasi-stationary distribution captures the behavior of a random process that admits one or several absorbing states, but it can evolve for a long time without reaching it, displaying a probability distribution not centered around the absorbing states during that time. I'm going to read it again. The quasi-stationary distribution captures the behavior of a random process that admits one or several absorbing states, but it can evolve for a long time without reaching it, displaying a probability distribution not centered around the absorbing states during that time. So this is from a draft of a paper that a collaborator wrote. So now, one problem I have with this, there's it. There's an it here and it here. It is not so clear, or I have to guess what this refers to. This it is what? And what is this it? This stands for something, right? So this it is, so it could be several things, right? It could be the quasi-stationary distribution, it could be the random process, or it could be the absorbing state. And in fact, this it is the random process, and reaching it is the absorbing state. Reaching the absorbing state, right? But the reader kind of has to sort of work that out, right? The reader has to go like, what is it? So there's an increased cognitive load on the reader here that could be avoided. So you make it more difficult for the reader or this, the author of this. So now, I just replace, so for the time being, I just replace this, right? So I put, but the process and I put an absorbing state. Just to get rid of these it's. Now I look at this. So we're talking here about a random process. It can evolve for a long time without reaching an absorbing state. So if the process can reach an absorbing state, then I don't have to say that the process admits an absorbing state, right? The fact that the thing can reach an absorbing state implies that it must. I don't have to say that twice. So I can remove this. I can just say a random process with absorbing states. Right, so I've shortened this, and then I will get rid of this later. Okay, I'll do that in a second. But this like admits one or several absorbing states. I just said with absorbing states, and then deal with the other issue in a minute. So now we have absorbing states, absorbing states, absorbing states 3 times. Do we need this? I can shorten this, right? Before, I don't have to say that so many times. The quasi-stationary distribution captures the long-time behavior of a random process before it reaches any absorbing state. So that implies that the random process must have absorbing states. Displaying a probability distribution, okay, now. Displaying a probability distribution not centered around the absorbing states. This is again a matter of taste. I would say the mode of the quasi-stationary distribution may not be an absorbing state. And I'm not sure one has to say this during that time. So, and now we've changed this into this. It's also, I don't know, it's about a third shorter maybe. Says the same thing. I think the green thing is clearer than the blue thing. I don't know, arguably, right? You can sort of argue about it. Okay, third example. Undisclosed e-physics thesis. In this chapter, we introduce the most basic concepts that we will use in this thesis. We start by giving a definition of graph network and of its most fundamental features, such as the concept of a degree. Additionally, we introduce the adjacency matrix, which, in general, can be utilized to explore structural features of the network to which it is associated. We also define fundamental concepts such as path or connected component. I understand it. It can be understood, right? I think this is a very reasonable, first or second draft that you've written down, but it can be edited further. So now I noticed here is basic concepts, fundamental features, concepts, structural features, and fundamental concepts. So fundamental and basic, and then features and concepts. And this basically nearly all combinations of these things appear here, right? Do we need that? Do we have to say concepts 3 times and features twice? I mean, is that needed in a 5-line paragraph? I don't know, right? So I try to eliminate some of these. So then there's this problem. Which in general can be utilized to explore. Sounds very complicated to me, that construction. It can maybe be simplified, right? And then explore the structural features of the network. The adjacency matrix can be utilized to explore the structure or features of the network, to which it is, well, of course, it is the network that goes with the adjacency matrix. So that I don't have to say that, right? This one doesn't have to say that. So we can delete this immediately. And then instead of structural features, I would just say structure. And then which in general can be utilized, we can maybe just say which characterizes the structure, or which describes the structure. Maybe describe is maybe even better. Characterize is a very complicated word. Describe is even better. Then this is the most basic concepts, the most fundamental features, the fundamental concepts. So then I rewrote it. I did some kind of more complicated rearranging. Because it basically, their basic features are defined here, the concept of a degree, and then it goes back to fundamental concepts such as path and connected component. Why not collect all these things in the same sentence? Right? There's a sentence here. We start by giving a definition of its fundamental features, such as the concept of a degree. Then something about the adjacency matrix, and then turning back to fundamental concepts, other fundamental concepts such as path and connected component. So I can simplify this by putting all this together. In this chapter, we introduce some basic concepts that we will use in this thesis. We start by defining a graph network and notions such as the degree of a node, a path, and a connected component. Additionally, we introduce the adjacency matrix, which characterizes the structure of the network. Simpler, no? Then this is additionally, okay, adverbs are not your friend, so could be removed, right? I put also, is also an adverb really, or something like that, is not much better. This is sort of debatable, right? But I didn't like the additionally comma thing. I would have put it like this, or maybe say nothing. But this is a minor point, and this is pedantic, or I don't think there's a right and wrong here. And then this, in the end, I thought like one could just remove this, right? Is this important? We also introduced the adjacency matrix. So this was probably on page 1 or 2 of the thesis, right? So at that point, the reader does not know what an adjacency matrix is, I guess. The author is saying, at some point, I will introduce the adjacency matrix. So the reader does not yet know what the adjacency matrix is. So there's no, I'm not sure it's needed to say this, right? Again, debatable. So anyway, so I've changed, this is not the only, I mean, if somebody else edits this, they may arrive at a different construction, right? And I know I'm being pedantic at times. Anyway, so now I'm reaching the end. So Stephen King has this pyramid of talent. He says they are bad writers, they are competent writers, they are good writers, and they are geniuses. And he says it is impossible to do anything. If you're a bad writer, you're a bad writer, and there's nothing you can do. And if you're a good writer, if you're not a genius, basically by birth, you will never be a genius writer, right? So that may be true. I don't know. Okay, I don't know, right? But I sort of don't agree with it. I think you can. So, and it's also not so clear where do we sit in this scheme, right? In the scheme of Stephen King, maybe we are all bad writers. I have no idea, right? I mean, or yeah, well, but he's American, though, right? Yeah, but okay. So anyway, yeah, I don't know, but okay, I don't. But so my claim is the following. So when you write your first paper as a student, right? Okay, there are some people who have a very high level of writing skills already, right? But let's say so then you write your first draft and your second draft, and it gets a bit better and a bit better, and then draft 27 at some point you submit it, right? This has gone to your supervisors and they edit it. This is your first paper. And you start from some baseline because this is the very first scientific paper that you write. You don't really know how to do it, right? Obviously. By the time you've written your 10th paper, your baseline is already a bit higher. Right? Hopefully, with each paper, the starting point becomes, so maybe the first draft of your 10th paper is about as good as the third draft of your first paper. And then maybe you need fewer drafts and you get to a higher level. And then by the time you write your 100th paper, maybe your baseline has gone up a bit more, and you need fewer drafts, but you can also maybe reach a higher level, right? That you maybe were not able to reach at the beginning, right? Hopefully. But so basically, this is the baseline somehow goes, and probably the baseline then saturates, right? I don't know, right? But that's what I'm saying. Like people like Emilio or I or anybody, we've written hundreds of papers, but probably there's, you know, we can also kind of do more, right? And so, for example, so I have not written many papers in like high profile journals, right? And I wrote, one paper with Doyen Farmer, and this is published in PNAS, and he wrote the paper, and it's like, I want to be able to write like this. So he wrote a story. This is just beautiful, right? And I cannot write like this, right? I would have to. This is a lot more. So he just. This is just this kind of craft of storytelling. But I think one learns this, right, over time, if one tries or can learn it. And then everybody has a probably different saturation level that is maybe set intrinsically, and also depends on how much effort and time some people want to spend on this. But this is sort of my view on it. So okay, so I'm at the end. So the take-home messages are: recognize the importance of good writing. That's what I would recommend. Put yourself in the mind of the reader. So show empathy. So what happens when you with referee reports, I've done. It's particular if it's sort of you want to get in a good journal. You're talking to the referee, but you also want to convince the editor. It's a very fine balance between being aggressive with the referee, being friendly. What do you want? And then you have to really ask yourself. So with Joe Barron, a former IFES postdoc and collaborator of mine, we did many Zoom calls about what will happen if we write this response like this. What do we want to happen in the referee's mind? And how can we trigger? So writing just a paragraph in a response letter, like if we write it like this, we will annoy this person, or this is too strong, this is too weak. How exactly do we want to do this, right? Writing is a tool for thinking. And so writing does not come after doing the research. It's part of doing the research. And if you write better, your science will be better. So all students who work with me, I probably told them relatively early on, write something, right? I want a LaTeX document because I think, I don't know. The first draft of anything will be bad, but you have to write it because you can't edit an empty page. And then you have to go through this process. It's the only way that I know. Good writing emerges from struggle, and don't stop with the third or fourth draft. Polish. That's the end of my talk.
So thank you as always for your very nice and useful talks. But I have a few things, but I won't go over all of them. I will say that some of the claims you did, for example, to not say that the high nonlinear, low nonlinear, things like this, or not saying regime. I think they are contextual to the message, but like highly contextual. I mean, in the focus of your work, I do have to agree that you do not always have to use this pompous language, but it depends on the point you are making that you do want to stress. I mean, if you're showing a graph and you always have a 10% increase and then suddenly you have a 500% increase, you don't have to say a gargantuan increase. I mean, you don't have to use grandiose adjectives, but you do have to say, okay, maybe it does, maybe you do want to use high or distinct or anomalous, or, but I think
just to reply. So I'm not saying you can never use an adverb, or you can never say highly nonlinear, or you can never say, I don't know, whatever, any of those things, right? But the point is, it should be a conscious decision whether you say it or not. So you have to. So my impression is that beginners write and don't consider these questions, right? So if somebody writes highly nonlinear, there must be a reason for why they say highly. It's not just highly nonlinear sounds nice.
Yeah.
It's like if there's a specific reason, and one can just. But that's what I mean. That good writing emerges through struggle by thinking about each and everything. Right? Is that really necessary? Can I remove it? And maybe the answer is no, I can't. Right? So I'm not saying you can never do this.
No, I think
Right?
we
So
agree.
that was not the
Yeah,
message, right?
yeah. We agree. Now to the strongest points that I would like to make is, for example, writing well can be a disadvantage. So a lot of the things that you have, yes, a lot of things that you have classified as writing well, I think they can be a disadvantage. For example, in different ways, depending on the editor. So I have had editors or reviewers completely, because they are from some country very distant in Asia, where they it's like a feedback loop of the English language between themselves, and they have just learned this way of writing, and they will actually massacre your paper, or even say, this is completely, it should not be we will accept it, but okay. I mean, I'm just saying that it's contextual also to who is assessing and evaluating your paper. In my experience, I mean, I have seen this. So you also have to consider, I agree with like your message and all the tips, but this can happen. And it can also happen, for example, that if you're publishing with an associate who is quite famous or well recognized, okay, maybe you can pass it. But if you're publishing maybe as a younger researcher, not well known, then you will get the axe, or you will get criticized in a lot of things, and maybe I don't know if it endangers your publishing, but I don't know. And also, what I have seen is now the ecosystem of publishing. I mean, we have all read papers which are doing these, outrageous or grandiose claims. But I feel like that is what the publishing ecosystem right now demands for. If I try to simplify my writing in a lot of the ways that I've seen, I can actually undermine the importance, or let's say lose convincing power for an editor who is reading like 100 papers a day, and he just wants you to get convinced that this is very important. So I don't know.
I disagree with that, because I think, so this also for writers, what they say is show, don't tell. So if you're saying, this is a very important result, the fact that you say it doesn't convince me. Show it. Don't tell me it's important. Show me that it's important. There's a difference between just sort of, this is very important, no evidence, as opposed to give me the evidence, show me that it's important, right? So I don't think by you gain much by inflating the I don't think this is
it's
right.
not so much about inflating itself. It's about, okay, show, don't tell. But how many papers do you read that, you read the abstract, and then, or you say, okay, I don't want to trust a lot the abstract, I'll just go to the figures and the methods and stuff. And the methods and the figures are just so convoluted that sometimes I think an abstract where you are, putting your work in some, okay, not too excessive grandioseness, but okay, it can make the difference for people to say, okay.
That's correct, but why is that bad? Why would, I don't understand how that is in conflict with good writing?
Because most of the claims that I understood are actually, they would take for me a degree of trying to convince you that this is important, take the time to actually understand, which in the show don't tell, maybe the show is actually demands more effort that some people, if you don't tell them that this is important, they will take to actually check for themselves. But I don't know. Also being picky by myself.
Yeah, well,
Anyone else? I have basically one question, and I have like my own answer to this, but I want to know your thoughts about it. And it is when you stop editing. basically, because in this case, for me, I have like in my mind the Pareto rule, and then there is the timeline. These are my two rules to stop editing, but I want to know your thoughts.
When all authors agree. I don't, this is very difficult to answer, right? You're right. At some point you have to say but because I could now take here draft 21 and look at it, and probably I would find something to improve, right? So there is a point where you have to stop, but that's correct. But I think the rule is when all authors agree, right? More or less. Right?
I mean, I have highly doubts that from version 1 to 12, there will be like major improvement. But I don't know if it's worth the improvement from 12 to 18, for example. I don't know.
Well, I don't know exactly what, but it depends. Of course,
it's just to debate it. I mean,
yeah. No, but they probably, so you're right. In the first versions, of course, the whole structure of the thing changes. Entire sections get moved around, like major operations happen, right? And in the later edits, it's mostly like this one paragraph is not quite right, or that, or should we add a paragraph here, or should we explain that better, or it depends, right? I mean, you cannot answer this. I mean, I'm not saying you should only publish one paper in your life, right? And the perfect paper at the end, right? At some point you have to, but sometimes, and I don't want to somehow come across as I'm like the guy who knows how to write. It's not true, right? I mean, it's not right. I'm not the king of writing or whatever, but sometimes you see drafts by people and you say, well, that person could have done this a bit better, right? If they had read it again. And I think if you then show this paragraph to if the person then sort of hopefully attends a talk like this where you say, well, I have to think about my writing, and you show them their own paragraph, this is like, well, they could have been a bit better, right? Like the papers that I wrote in 2000, I mean, I don't know, my papers can be improved, right? But no author at that point spotted it. I didn't spot it, no author spotted it apparently, right? But so the microphone, I don't know how.
Oh, thinking about it, maybe a good point to stop is like when the change is like when the improvement saturates,
yes.
no? That, I mean, that's good. For if from the 10 to the 11 is like mostly the same in terms of quality, maybe you have to stop there.
So my former collaborator, Alan McCain in Manchester, he had this rule. If he was editing, version 18, and if the number of changes he had was larger than the number of pages that manuscript has, then it's not yet finished. So if there's about one change per page, it's not yet finished. That was his rule. But he also said, yeah, I worked with these people said it's fine to submit, and I had 25 changes, right, in a paper for 10. So he's the most pedantic, he's even more than I am, I think. I learned most of that, so I don't know. I recently wrote a paper with a German guy in the UK. This is the most pedantic I've seen. So I'm a kind of very mild compared to that, right, to this guy.
So thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask you about ChatGPT. So we are now at a point where, unfortunately, most AIs write better English than non-native speakers. Like there's this study that asked people to differentiate between AI and non-native speakers, and people thought the non-native speakers were the AI. So something that quite recently is working for me is in that interpolating ChatGPT improvements. So the first draft is fine, the second is from ChatGPT. The third one, I disagree completely with what he has said, but that makes me think about if he misunderstood it, then a reader will too. Then I give it again, then iterate. What's your opinion on that?
I don't have an opinion. I have not used ChatGPT for that purpose, so I have no idea how well this works. I can see the benefits, right? But I can also see dangers, right? That I guess the answer is if you do it responsibly, like what you described looks like a reasonable, right? If you then read it and then edit it again, but ultimately you are responsible, right? So I have had cases where somebody sent me a manuscript, PhD student, and then there was an introduction, and I said, but this thing and this is not, and this is not, and this is weird here, and then, yeah, but I did this with ChatGPT. You can't blame me, right? So that's of course not right, right? So that's not right. You can use it, but it still remains the author's responsibility or whoever produced the draft, right? That's what I would say, right? So you can use it as a tool, right? But not, I don't know, right? But I haven't used it myself, so I don't know.
Thank you, Tobias, for the effort to prepare this. I think it's useful for everybody. Just one point, you have show examples of the paragraphs with the point in the beginning, with the point at the end, but you have not concluded. Is there a better choice, or just is better to avoid the center? You just show that this happens.
I don't know. I don't think there's a clear. So this comes from this book by Schimmel, Writing Science, and he has a whole more theory in the book how to construct paragraphs, and he has various schemes of topic and then development and then a challenge and then a resolution and all these kind of things. So I didn't go into that, but I think the point more is each paragraph has to have a point, and you can kind of put it at the beginning or at the end, right? And how you do it, I guess, depends on context. I don't think there's a clear answer to that, right?
Thank you for the talk. I think that it gave us a lot of work for thought and stuff. But I would like to propose, I don't know if it was your intention or not, if you could make public, I mean, inside the FISC space, like in the GitLab that we have or in any other, or the cloud, if you can make public the presentation so that people can return back.
It's hopefully, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think that the
slide
slide are.
the PDF. But I want to stress again, this is not meant to be a course on writing, right? This was not my idea. The main, hopefully, when you leave here, you go like, well, he has a point. It is worth thinking about writing more, right? And about how I construct paragraphs or sentences or words, right? And then you may agree or disagree with individual cases that I have presented. But the idea is just to sort of to be more conscious about this, right? That was the point of the talk.
Yeah, but for example, there are some PDFs that can be useful for some books.
Sure. But as I said, I'm not saying you have to delete all adverbs, right? This is not the idea of this talk. And it is really. I also over the last months I read these books or looked at these books, and I was like, well, I never thought about these things, right? I just wrote something that seems reasonable. This is what I said, right? Most educated writers are happy with their writing. You just don't think about, it's probably okay, right? My papers get published, it's probably okay. But, right? So.
Any more questions here before we move online questions?
Thanks, Tobias, for the talk. Very useful. Have you ever had the case when, like, writing a paper that maybe you try to be like more simple with language to be a better communicator, it turns out to be a negative thing in the sense that maybe it was not too formal, or you had some critics like that?
So I cannot point to a specific case, but it is true that being very pedantic and be very guarded with things like makes your paper can make your papers technical, right? Because you sort of say, well, if this happens and that happens, and so you're going into, because you sort of don't want to say anything wrong, really, right? And that can make a paper technical, and then it's maybe good for PhysRev, but not for, I don't know, some other. That's what I'm saying. This paper that I wrote with Doyen Farmer, for example, he wrote it in a way that I would not have been able to write, and it. Yes, so there is some kind of trade-off somehow to be, but this is partly about papers and partly about internal notes that you send to your supervisors or to your collaborators or something, right? And in the initial technical notes, I think you have to be as clear as you can, right? And then we can sort of afterwards say, well, how do I spin the story, right? So Geim, the Nobel Prize winner, I think it was him or Novoselov, one of them, in a session on proposal writing, grant proposal writing in Manchester, I remember this, no, it was Geim. He was saying, if you write a grant proposal, or like if you have the choice between being boring and being wrong, you choose being wrong. So this was an overstatement, right? But I think what it means is not wrong. I think what it means is more like if you can, so it's not wrong, but if you don't have to, you have to tell the truth, but not the whole truth, let's say, right? I would say, or not, you don't always have to tell the full truth, right? So making the writing attractive is somehow also so by the way, there's a guy I shared the office with in Oxford. So Stephen Whitelam, if you Google him, he's now in Berkeley, I think, and he has a document that is called Defensive Writing. Defensive Writing. And there's a talk on YouTube. I don't know if it's Stephen with a V, Steve, I don't know. He's in Berkeley, the National Lab. So if you Google it, so this is a guy, so I would like to write like him. He has this document, and this talk is a super ironic talk and a super ironic document. And I read it, it's like, if I could write like that, but I can't, right? I don't know, there's some people who have this ability of
Anyone else? Okay, I do have a question actually.
Okay.
So now that I finished working as the microphone guy, and how do you imagine it's a paper you're just writing by yourself? So there's no one else to go and review it before sending it, because obviously if you have someone else reading it, it's quite easy to have many drafts. But if it's only you with yourself, how do you manage to go against yourself in the sense of, okay, I think this is bad enough, I have to rewrite it or not? Because I think it's a bit of a struggle in that sense, isn't it?
That's correct. So I must admit, I have not written a single author paper for a while, but I did write a few at the beginning of my career. I don't know. This is difficult to answer. I think I had a slide which I deleted then because there were too many. It's like one thing you can ask yourself is assume a super malicious reader, like somebody who really wants to misunderstand what you're saying. Make it impossible for that person. Right, so that's a sort of devil's advocate kind of. What if I have the strongest possible opponent, the most nasty referee that you can imagine? What would that person say if they read this, right? I don't know, but ultimately, if you're by yourself, at some point, you can show it to somebody, right? I mean, I think if somebody writes a paper and sends it to a more senior person and says, "Can you have a look at this?" I think, I don't know, people, you should get feedback, right? And that's, by the way, for grant proposals in particular. I mean, I think this should be a kind of rule number one is never submit a grant proposal that hasn't been read by other people, right?
Yeah.
I think the thing about the empathy for the reader you said like will help in that case, because like I'm starting to write in the thesis, okay? I wrote the first paragraph, whatever. And then I read it again and I said, okay, no, that's not really good. A reader wouldn't like that. Like, I would like to read something more fluid or something, so then you can operate on yourself, like change your text based on if I were the reader, would I be happy with what I'm reading right now? I think
yeah,
that's
exactly. That's for a thesis, for example. That's always or anything. Like sometimes I sort of say, imagine yourself. I mean, if you're a student and you're finishing your thesis, go back 4 years when you started working on this. What is the paper that you would have liked to read about this, right? So imagine somebody else had done this work. You're a first-year PhD student, and now your supervisor says, read this paper, and then we continue from that. What would you like this paper to be like, right? So that kind of, but also reading papers sort of help. If you read papers and say, well, this is not very good here, right? If you learn usually from the bad examples, right? That you sort of like, this is not how to do it, right? and then, or
Just also a comment on that. For me, it really helps a lot to like wait even a week or so, because then when you reread, it's like you're the reader, not the writer anymore, and then you can have this different
correct,
view.
correct. This is exactly what happened here when I look at my papers from 2005 or whatever. It's like, who the heck, like, why did I write this?
Just like a tip, there are now, because of the efforts of trying to do open science, like the post review sites, there is, like I got invited a few weeks ago, I mean, they just asked, could you review this paper? It's in Queios, Queios. And so you can basically post a preprint there, and then someone will review it for you. For example, I told the other person, do not send this, like, under any circumstance, this is so badly written, blah, blah, blah. And you can just get feedback like that, posting it in a post review kind of archive sites. There are a lot of them right now.
But I think if you're a student or a postdoc, it's sort of part of the job of your mentor is to look at your draft. If you, right? I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so if there's no more comments, Raul asks if you can comment on the use and abuse of acronyms.
The use and abuse of acronyms.
Like if you want to unmute yourself or explain something else in the chat, feel free, and we will read.
The use. I don't know. Obviously, each acronym has to be defined. But if you use a particular acronym 20 times in the draft, I mean, if you say quasi-stationary distribution in every other paragraph, then it's maybe worth introducing QSD, right? But if you're using a word only, I don't know, 3 times in a 10-page paper, I wouldn't necessarily introduce an acronym for that, right? So, I don't know.
What do you think about footnotes?
Footnotes.
Because I think that in early stages of the career, we abuse a little bit of footnotes to make ourselves clear.
Well, footnotes in papers are, I must say, I also did, you're right. I mean, I also did that. I don't use them much, I must say, occasionally, but very rarely. I don't think there's a general answer. No, it depends on the context. Well, I also use parentheses. I don't know. Even though it was on the first slide as a joke. I don't know. Sometimes it's better to put it in a footnote, right? If it interrupts the flow, otherwise. These days, it's mostly like for details, see supplement section, so and so. It just kind of has the same purpose. But
Okay, so if there anything else to comment, we can thank Tobias and go eat lunch.